Hey everyone, I really hope you engaged with yesterday's reflection as we looked at the majesty and power of the King, so that as we come to the kingdom of the King, we have an appropriately large view of the King. Now, as we come to today's reflection, think about some of the big political decisions that some of our global leaders have made recently. I mean, being part of a global community, there are certain decisions that are made for the American people that we know about, but they don't really mean anything for us, even if they may change life completely for people living in the USA, for example. And the reverse is true if certain decisions are made by our leaders here in South Africa or in New Zealand for that matter. While we don't use words like king and kingdom, we still understand inherently that there is a realm whereby the will of the ruler or president or king ought to be effective, where it is understood that we are under this person's will. Now, the kingdom of God is not defined by some borders on a map, but rather is defined by the active rule and reign of the true king, where planet Earth is under enemy rule, and the invitation from God is, as we become part of God's kingdom, we actually come under his rule because he is the rightful king. And as we obey him, as we live according to his will and his ways, more of his kingdom comes. In other words, more of God's people and his creation come under the rightful rule of Jesus. Now, it shouldn't surprise us that when Jesus teaches us to pray, he teaches us to pray, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Can you see this is so much more than our typical prayers of, Lord, what is your will for my life? Or Lord, do I take this job or that job? Now, there's nothing wrong with praying that, but I think it is important to see that if we are to be shaped by the King for the sake of his kingdom coming, for the sake of more of his people and his creation coming under his rightful rule, this is our starting point. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth, in my life, in my family. And so our starting point is, Lord, how do I become someone through whom your kingdom comes? And how do I live under your reign and rule? How do I become someone who is not living under enemy rule or selfish rule, but the rule of the rightful king? How do I live out your rule and your will and your ways in every aspect of my life? Now, this is going to look a lot like obedience, but I hope you can see not the type of obedience of begrudgingly obeying some random rules I don't really like, but rather a willingness to align all of my life with the new king and kingdom. And that when I do this in participation with the activity of the king, I become a place of the kingdom of the king coming on earth, at work, in my home. And then yes, as we live under the reign of the king, we can also begin asking what God's will is for some of the specific decisions in my life. But now the more we live under the reign and rule of the king, the more we become accustomed to the will of the king, the way of the king, the voice of the king. And then we become better positioned to hear and recognize the wisdom of the king in more specific circumstances. So if we're willing to completely surrender to his will, as opposed to just hoping God will rubber stamp what you have already decided, then you may sense God lead you in a specific direction. Or you may sense God saying, well, you choose. Just whether you go to that job or this job, just bring my kingdom there. Or you may sense God saying no, or you may wish God was more clear in a specific request, which even then is an invitation to continue living as one who lives under the reign and rule of the king, through whom and in whom his kingdom comes. So in today's prayer and reflection, we're going to take some time to actively pray about the kingdom of the great king coming and how I can increasingly be part of the will and the kingdom of the king.